So we're going to have a conversation. We'll talk for about 30 minutes. And then, of course, we want to open it up to questions and comments and thoughts from everybody. And actually, if people have burning thoughts, they can actually interrupt. Why not? There's a lot to say about this work. There's a lot to say about the turn towards Eastman in the last few years. Here in New York, the recent Festival of the Kitchen, before that in Philadelphia, over the last 2 years in Berlin, a couple of years back in London, and then a previous event in London, and also in Oslo, and maybe in other places as well.
Documenta.
Yeah, there's Documenta.
Yeah.
How could I forget that? Yeah, Venice as well. So, so the uptake, so the turn towards Eastman is, it's an ongoing phenomenon, and there are many kind of critical reasons why Eastman's music matters now. And so, as a way to open up that question of why Eastman's music means so much to people now, and why so many people from different moments and different points within the world of so-called new music and within the world of art are turning towards his work, his legacy. Maybe one way of starting is just to ask you, Jace, how you came into contact with Eastman, and just to recreate for us that sense of encounter with the work, and then we can do that as well, so just to set the scene.
Yeah, sure. So it was actually way back in 2011, and I actually, the performer had commissioned a little radio play, and I knew, and of course, space had a piano in it. And so I knew I said, oh, this is a really interesting opportunity to kind of dive into piano sounds, to think about, I knew I wanted to do live processing, pull the piano into the laptop, and so forth. And I knew I wasn't going to write the music. So I started thinking, well, what could I use that would somehow be conducive to this? So in a sense, it was this very kind of formal investigation. And then I was talking to my friend Sharifa Rhodes Pitts, who's in the house, and telling her about this project, and she said, well, hey, you should check out the music of this guy, Julius Eastman. And so, and this was 2011, I went, I heard it, I was blown away. It's muscular, it's romantic, it's dense, it's epic, it's funny, it does all these things. And then I was like, New York in the 70s and 80s, such a fertile time. I know so much about music, I've read so much about it, and I had not encountered him anywhere in the written record, and of course I'd heard him on Meredith Monk, and looking back, he was very, very present. But from that moment, thinking, okay, this, as these scores he's left us, they're such powerful things. They continue to communicate, and the sphere, the sort of affective sphere around Eastman seems so rich. So I said, okay, this is what it's going to be. This is something I want to work with and sort of engage and revive his antagonisms.
Actually, I think when we first came across Eastman was about 10 years ago, something like that, with was it the Gojonas precisely the moment, but I think for me it was with the release of the album Unjust Malaise, which is an anagram of Julius Eastman. And I think in making this project, you're working from your work is also very much based on interpretation of Eastman's scores. And I was wondering, because in relation to the way we approached this, we had cameras and lights, and we were filming people, this ensemble. But before we get into that, because we could talk about that, but I was interested in your relationship to interpretation in terms of your work.
It's funny. to me, it was important not to respect the work of Jace Eastman. That was kind of a core consideration. And so I said, okay, I'm going to work with these two amazing pianists, David Friend and Emily Manzo, and they are going to play kind of quote-unquote faithful renditions of Evil Nigger and Gigarilla. And the scores will have marked things down to the second. You know, there are moments where it can get loose, but it's also very specific. And so they are being very faithful. But on top, I'm pulling up all this, taking sound from the piano, but then always improvising, always kind of messing things around. And in the middle of the Jace Eastman Memorial Dinner, there's this whole section where the music stops, and suddenly I'm having a Skype interview, being interviewed for a job as a Jace Eastman impersonator. And a lot of human resource language, and it just shifts into another way of thinking about it. But so there I was like, okay, this person who is, you know, existing on the edges of these various archives, how can I engage with that? And so I said, okay, well, reverence can be a form of forgetting. So I don't want to do that. And thinking of Eastman as a problematic figure, you even get it in the text here, sort of imperious, kind of demanding, you know. He was purposely putting these titles like that would limit his entree into the historical record, that would limit who could say them, where they could be performed, so on and so forth. And I was like, this is amazing. And it's not to me to just sort of re-present this music. I need to both interrupt it and implicate myself and present a kind of doubled listening space where people can hear the pianos, but they're going to get the sort of messiness of my interference or the sort of a rough and tumble collaboration on top of that.
I like your point about the revival of antagonisms. I have first heard about Jace Eastman. I was online at some moment in 2007, and I came across this playlist by the American artist Sam Durant. He had a show in London, which I'd missed, but there was a playlist of 20 compositions, and I knew 18 of them. 2 of them I didn't know. One was by the African-American composer Donald Fox, a composition called Dialectics for 2 Grand Pianos, which is an amazing composition and an amazing title. And the other was Jace Eastman, Evil Nigger. And I was like, wow, how come I don't know Donald Fox or Jace Eastman? I was kind of irritated. So I Googled them both straight away. And on YouTube, there was Unjust Malaise. Mary Jane Leach, the composer, had worked on it for a decade, and somebody posted it all on YouTube. So I listened to it all, and I was so shocked by the ecstatic intensity, the kind of the mixture of militancy, joy, and anger, which seemed to far surpass whatever it was I thought minimalist music was. It seemed to move far beyond, you know, minimalism that I knew and loved. I mean, I was just shocked, and then I realized I'd heard Jace Eastman. There he is in Dinosaur Elm, in Arthur Russell's Go Back. That's him singing I Want to Go Back, bang, bang, go, bang, go. That's him. I'd heard him years ago. I just didn't realize. That's him with that incredible baritone. That's him playing the organ on Corn Belt. So there he is. He's an ally of Arthur Russell. He's playing with Meredith Monk. He's playing with Frederick Chesky. He's playing with Hans Peter Henze. But none of his own music is recorded and released properly in his own lifetime. So with Eastman, I always have this, on one hand, a kind of zealotry. I become a missionary. You know, I think maybe a lot of people have this. I become a missionary, I press it on people, I become a pusher. Like, look, it's Eastman. Just stop what you're doing and pay attention. First of all, it's, you know, you should know it. If you think you are, you know, you're invested in music, you should know Eastman. You just should. So I just become really zealous. And, but also, you know, and I've said this before, but it hasn't gone away. The zealotry and the kind of impassioned, kind of permanent persuasion is inseparable from and indivisible from a kind of fear and a kind of horror a horror that Eastman's music was forgotten, to the extent that it took me until 2007 to discover it, and a kind of fear that an avant-garde figure of such brilliance could be erased, and then a kind of anger that erasure somehow persisted from his death in 1990 right the way through to 2007 for me. And then a horror that if Eastman could be disappeared, you know, naively enough, neither me nor anybody I know is safe from the kind of the forces of erasure, the forces that work steadily and kind of ceaselessly to erase black avant-garde brilliance. So this mixture of fear, anger, dread, and joy always accompany me with Eastman. So, you know, years go by, I push Eastman on everybody. I see, you know, different people working with Eastman, but nobody's made a video yet, you know. So we talk a lot about how to make a video in which music is not the soundtrack to a video. Music is the matter of the video. Because, you know, when you have music with a video, there is a tendency to make the music the soundtrack of it. So the music is in a certain sense of structured subordination to the image. But the idea was, how can we make a music in which the image, the montage, the camera, the lighting, everything is informed by and at the service of the music? This was the question. How would we do that? And this is a question we really kind of turned over for years and years, until one day there was this invitation to make a work in Sharjah, and somehow we just said, hey, you know what? Philadelphia and Sharjah, and there was this opportunity, well, because the money was there.
The money came from Sharjah, but
yeah.
The commission was from ICA.
So then it became a question of, okay, now we can put these ideas into action. Now we can actually go ahead and make this work. So that's kind of my encounter with Eastman.
I was interested in what you said about Eastman in relation to this kind of question of him being a kind of problematic figure, because I mean, I like that. You know, we were just talking outside, because I think the thing that is very kind of, the first thing you notice when you come to America is like how polite people are in this kind of way, and you're kind of seduced by it, and kind of have a nice day, how are you, this kind of thing, and everybody is very sort of polite and nice, and it's nice, it's genuinely a nice feeling, because people are just, you know, the face is nice, you know, and then you kind of realise, oh, it's because everyone's just trading and there's no healthcare and it's all awful, and basically everyone has to be nice so they can like impress other people who can help them sort of, you know, get a market behind them, and especially in the art world, it's just so much about that, right? So in Britain, because we had a really good welfare system, which the fascists and Tories are trying to get rid of and are slowly getting rid of, you know, it meant that a lot of people could make music and be poor and live safely and go to university and have healthcare and not give a damn about being visible to a kind of global audience, and could just get on with it and be weird and be angry and be critical and create arguments and throw things around. And you know, I mean, that to me is life. I don't understand what else is life if you cannot have a good argument, if you cannot be as strange as possible and as angry as possible, as well as being happy and have a nice day. So, in a world where trade is the kind of social motivator, somebody like Eastman was obviously wanting to kind of, you know, fight this in his own way, and he used every single sort of encounter with people in a way to kind of almost create this antagonism. the fact that it was art, or new music, was a way to kind of make the antagonism convivial. But it still upset people. And the term, the N-word, because in Britain it's not so polite to use that with so much kind of ease, that term, when it was spoken by him in this way, it was much more uncomfortable than it is now.
I don't think it could be any more uncomfortable than it is now.
No, but I mean, in terms of hip-hop hadn't sort of, let's say, exported it in the way it has now. But yeah, it is obviously very uncomfortable now. But this speech that, not speech, but this introduction that Jace Eastman gives, I mean, you know this, but I'm going to just say it to everybody. It was in 1980 in Northwestern. So when Koja and I thought about making this work, we were thinking, well, we have to include that. And we have to also include it in a way, with two people. Because it is, and turn it into a performance in itself. So Elaine Mitchiner, who you see performing, is a vocalist and experimental musician and vocalist in the new music scene. And so the way she is performing it, I don't know if anybody noticed, is as if it is a score in itself. She is actually kind of performing the idea of the third part, of the third measure, if you like. And she's performing it with rage, because, and this was her first take, and she did it so, I mean, I've seen this film obviously hundreds of times now, but each time I see it, I learn something from it. And the first person was Dante Michaud, who's a poet and a theorist, and he's studying in Britain, in London at Birkbeck, and it was actually the night before I thought we really need to find a queer African American to read out this part. And the night before we were at dinner with a friend, and I said, we need someone, tomorrow we're shooting, and she happened to have this gay African American there who was in law at Birkbeck, and he said, I know about Easter, which was a surprise, but then he said, I've got a friend who loves his work, and that's how we found Dante, and he turned up the next day. So excited to kind of perform this, because he obviously knew about it. For us, Koja talked about the filming aspect of it. And we were also discussing outside with Jace about this, how the camera extends the piece in terms of its performance. We are used to hearing, Eastman. This was quite a challenge to us, because obviously we've been brought up with great music video, being the age we are and whatever. But, we studied like all kinds of images in terms of photography, and also films of where pianists had been filmed. And I realized that nobody had actually focused that much on the hands. And when you begin to focus on the hands, you get a whole other kind of relationship to the performance of the piece, because it's so physically difficult to play. The hands then doubled on the kind of mirror of the piano, increase the kind of militancy. It's almost like they're typing, right? And the other thing was light, because Koja mentioned that, because light played a huge role, because there's this famous quote by Eastman on light, which I can't remember right now, but it's something like more light, more light. And I think it's kind of referencing this idea of the Enlightenment as a kind of provocation to the Enlightenment. But then Edouard Glissant, the Martinican poet and theorist, he writes a lot about this idea of opacity. But opacity for him isn't a space of absorption, it's also a space of refraction. So the black mirror of the piano and the light fitting that we created allowed us to use the black mirror of the piano to refract light and to use the camera to catch that refraction in many different angles. I'm sorry if that's all too much information, but I just wanted to go through those points. But I was interested if we could just talk a little bit more about this idea of the problematic nature of these.
Yeah, in a way, for me, you're kind of riffing off the nice American thing. Like, there's something nice nowadays about programming Eastman. You say, okay, like our classical music series is very old and dead white men everywhere, you know, run by an older, and then you put Eastman on the thing, and it's like, okay, it's cool, it's inclusive, we love that, and so it's, on the one hand, I'm torn. I think, to me, the exciting thing is the challenges and opportunities Eastman presents to thinking of what a sort of radical, queer, black historiography could be. So there's the impulse of, like, we need to, like, he has been disappeared, as you say, like, let's proliferate in many different ways, mutate and spread. But then also think of, like, what are the sort of like the ontological challenges that Eastman presents to even thinking of how, like what does it mean to need an icon, you know, or someone like Lee Lozano, New York conceptualist in the 70s, who did the Dropout piece and dropped out from the art world. Like, what are these moments of saying, what can we subtract? Is this a loss? How does the sort of the damage, you know, often the story of Eastman losing his scores and Tompkins Square Park and all these things, various types of self-destruction, thinking of these as intentional decisions in many cases, both the decision to write this epic piece and then to be careless with it. So I'm interested in that strange and pressured play.
I think those are really good points, because there's a kind of martyrology around Eastman, and you know, part of the return to Eastman is a kind of penitence. It's the new music world apologizing for its structural racism and apologizing for its treatment of Eastman. And in a way, there's a trace element of that in the video, the way the pianists who have effectively been, you know, on one hand they interpret Eastman, on the other hand they have been put to work by Eastman. But you know, when Elaine is talking, they look like penitents, you know, that they are kind of sitting in a state of attention, and they're very calm. So on one hand there is this element of kind of mea culpa around the resurgence of Eastman. And that speaks to, you know, questions of legacy and questions of aesthetic reparation. Part of what we wanted to do was return to Eastman via Edouard Glisson's notion of a prophetic vision of the past. So that, you know, the speech that Anjali referred to, the speech that Dante Michaud and Elaine Michener speak, that's from 16th January 1980 in the Pig-Steiger Concert Hall in Northwestern University, which is in Evanston, of course. So Julius Eastman steps up onto the stage. He's wearing camouflage. He was a kind of a leather guy. Normally he wore leather trousers, motorbike boots, leather jacket, and a big keychain. But this time he was wearing camo, military camo. And he gives this speech, and then he sits down, and he's one of the 4 pianists, and they play this music. And part of the kind of informing idea of our video is that, you know, remember the last sentence where he says, you know, I don't yet feel that gaydom has the courage of Afghani guerrillas and gay guerrillas, but I hope that it might, and he hopes that he might have the courage to be a gay guerrilla. The informing idea of our video is that the pianists themselves That's Zubin Kanga, the Indian, Australian performer who does the count up. The older man is Rolf Hines. The woman with black hair, we call her the Vermeer Lady, that's Eliza McCarthy. And then the blonde woman is Siwan Rees. So when we do the installations, we always have these names printed. The idea is that they are the gay gorillas. Like 37 years after Eastman looks forward to them, they've arrived. So they've arrived not for Eastman, not for his music, but for us here, now, all of us, spectators, listeners, because the idea is that, effectively the idea is that they are training us. They're training us in vigilance, in resilience, in steadfastness, in concentration, in courage, in what Eastman called boundless courage. That was the working title for the video, Boundless Courage, which we needed to actually to dare ourselves to make the video in the first place. So the idea is that we, that's to say, people who consider themselves to be freaks, maladjusted people who consider themselves, people who have a hard time adjusting to capitalism. All of these people are facing all kinds of wars, all kinds of battles, whichever field they're in. And these are real battles. And frankly, we need all the weapons we can get. We need all the training we can get. I feel like I need training. I feel like I need to be better equipped for the wars and the battles, small and large. And that's how we saw this video. It's a training film. And so the pianists are, they have an esprit de corps, they have a togetherness. They're communicating continually, they're signaling to each other, they are bound together, so they are warriors on the spiritual plane of music. And for us, Eastman is protest music. Okay, it's not hip hop, it's not grime, it's not rock, but it's protest music. It's ecstatically angry music. It's beautiful, it has a beautiful rage. It has a necessary rage. When they start, within about 2 minutes, you can see those fingers racing, and it's like horses galloping over your head, kicking you in the head, pounding you into the mud. And the horses are just racing over your head for 27 minutes. And it's ecstatic.
But it's also like a sustained escape. There's a sustained run. It feels like running.
And I love this idea of being sort of hailed by Eastman's work, calling us to action, because it kind of plays with something about these ideas of historiography, what that might look like if time is non-linear. And so it happens at all different scales. You get us being trained and activated by this thing that happened in 1980, but then within these piano pieces themselves, as he explains very carefully, he's like, they're proceeding organic. It's not some sort of arrow or the sequential hierarchical thing. It's a very distinct way of thinking about the way music organizes time. And then like clicking out even further, his whole quote, he's on this sort of proto-Afro-pessimist tip. He's like, okay, socially determined nigger, it's the birth of enlightenment with American capitalism, but now it's this sort of atemporal problem. It's ontological, it's messy, and it spreads backwards and forwards in time, and he's gathering the gay gorillas from decades past, decades present. Joan of Arc is being called upon, we're being called upon.
That's a brilliant way of putting it. Maybe now it's time to go to some questions, because of course we can just talk forever and just ignore you. But since you've come out to see this and come out to hear us, then maybe it's a good time to go to some thoughts from everybody gathered here. So if anybody wants to say anything, now's your chance. Please speak up.
And we do have a mic for you as well.
We can just carry on.
I have one.
Oh, is that Sharifa? Good.
Hello, everyone. I was interested in the figures, and I was thinking of them as figures, and curious about the story you've just given us of them as the gay gorillas. Was it one that you gave them, or did you depend on the music to give that to them? Because looking at their faces, I was wondering like what the operation was. Was it the music working on their faces, or was it also like part of the direction? And then it was very moving in general. I'm really happy to have the chance to see this film. I've been wanting to see it since last spring. And I'm interested in what you said about like they've been put to work by Eastman and the relationship of those musicians, those particular musicians, to the music. My ongoing, Jace will know what I'm about to say, desire to see this music performed by all Black musicians at the same time, and what that would mean, just as the idea of calling forth these gay gorillas, like, would anybody be able to handle the four evil niggers at the same time? I haven't seen it perfect. I've seen it perfect a few different times in a few different places, so I wonder about that call that's as yet unanswered.
Okay, so we can take different parts of that. You want to start?
Yeah. Well, the intention was to find 4 African American pianists to play this piece by Julius Eastman. But it was not as easy as it might appear, not because, of course, there are not that many African American pianists coming out of the music schools in the UK, especially now because of the fact that we are charged to go to university. But you know, even when it was free, it was you know, there's just structural racism which prevented people from joining those courses. Then there is the issue of the fact that actually to play, even if we found 4 people, we would have needed 1 year or 2 of them actually becoming an ensemble. Becoming an ensemble, you know, as you people who play music know, and you know, isn't easy. So for them to all, you know, for us to find those people, to rehearse them, to work with them, we didn't simply have the money, and we couldn't do it. There was a kind of event that happened in London, based around Eastman's music, and we saw this ensemble play. And I think that when we met them, it was so clear that they were so enraptured by Eastman's music and so good at playing it, and had really got this kind of esprit de corps amongst them. And the question of raciality for us then became more complicated, because they are being you know, they are performing this piece by Eastman, and when you see them performing, there is a labour in that. There is a labour, you know, you can see, I mean, to do this, to make this film, they performed it 6 times over 2 days. That's hard work. But it was almost like the spirit of Eastman. I think George Lewis talks about it in the book by Mary Jane Leach, is it? That the spirit of Eastman is kind of alive, so it kind of felt that there's a quote by George in that book, but there's a sense that he was there sort of putting them to work, you know, and it was almost like there is a kind of other, I mean, this wasn't intentional, but in the edit, and now we've made it, there is a sense that this labour is present in the work, the labour of playing this Eastman piece. For us, Eastman queers the idea of being Black with the idea of being gay, and we have interpreted it also to queer the idea of political Blackness. I am of South Asian descent, Kojo is of African descent, we're both born in London, but in a British context, the idea of political Blackness was not based purely just on one's heritage, but on one's politics. and labour movements and unions and factory movements, one forgets that Indians were also called by the N-word by the British, or coons, or these terms were used by the British against Indians that they were colonising. So I think the British context around these things is like slightly different to the American.
Yeah, I'm really aware of that context.
yeah.
I wasn't even requiring or asking for a defensive because I
Yeah.
I've heard the story of why
Yeah.
it wasn't. So that's, I'm just interested in this, obviously continuously need to expand this call, and I really appreciate the way that you expressed it with your, and I think that.
No, I mean, it's just, I mean, of course it would be so wonderful to, if there was an ensemble, and maybe there will be in the future, but maybe one exists in the US, I'm not sure.
Isn't there like an all-black orchestra in London?
Is there an all-black?
The kids who played at the wedding. Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there were many, there were many black classically trained musicians. Zubin Kanga, Zubin said there are 20 musicians who can play Julius Eastman in the UK. This ensemble had been playing for the longest time. So in a way, we adopted their expertise and parasitized it for our purposes, And so that means taking the conditions of the actual conditions in the kind of new music world, and in a way kind of diverting them towards our purposes. So in a way, the kind of structural racism that existed in Eastman's time has not advanced so much in the UK. In the US, it may be different, but the UK has these specific conditions. So in a way, this was our first touch with the new music world, which is as you might imagine, its own habitus. But to answer your other point, we did kind of give the musicians this notion of the gay gorillas, this notion of being a kind of assassins on the plane of music. And so they did 2 takes on the first day and 4 takes on the second day, and that meant when they went home they already had the nail polish. So they sat on the train with their silver nails, and they said people stared at them as if they were a cult. So in that sense it was working. So they were an ensemble, but they felt even more marked out. So their set faces, their demeanor, their kind of mask-like serenity, all of that was instructional. Like that's kind of what we wanted them to be.
Well, no, but sorry, they were like that. We didn't have to do very much. They had a beautiful elegance about them. We didn't say sit up straight and look very peaceful when you finish, or anything like that. They actually did that. They have incredible poise.
That's true, but the first time we saw them was at the London Contemporary Music Festival, and they had a kind of, they were more casual. They were focused, but they were kind of relaxed. Here they were like militant. That's what we wanted.
Cameras change things.
Yeah, there's 3 huge cameras with telephoto lenses. You can't get too close to them. So this is a recording studio in St. John's Wood. There's 2 massive cameras, but not too close. And then there's 1 camera which is kind of moving around, and then there's the recording engineer as well. And then there are gaffers, and there's a lot of people, and it's kind of pressured. It's a pressured environment, and these people clearly, these 4 musicians clearly can perform under that kind of pressure. They just enter into a zone, and then move through it, and stay in it until the performance ends, and then they have to go and lie down, like athletes, or horses, or dancers, or politicians, or soldiers. Thank you. Anyone else? lady in front.
The previous question was a part of my question because I have been trying to think all through this film. What should I do about this? Because you mentioned earlier that motivation for making this is partially trying to figure out how to visually servicing to the body of sound work. Is that correct? And then now here I am, I'm looking at this thing, and obviously this I try not to put in my mind this kind of disturbing idea of 50 Shades of Grey kind of a skin tone thing. Even though I am aware, obviously paler-looking people playing this music and things like that. But besides the fact, I was thinking also that, how the contemporary classical music, sort of way being presented, and how it is socially speaking, situation in Britain, obviously a little bit different in the US. Probably you can have who you initially wanted to seek out, but even that, it is partially there and here, even in contemporary time. And then I was looking at this face painting you just mentioned, almost made me think okay, this is really trying to put them in a state of futuristic, some timeless, samurai kind of, mask kind of thing. And then it partially worked, but still I just thought wow, this reflected against the blackness of piano. And it's really, is it a kind of cliche and taking it, and is this how this frustration, it was disturbing in a sense, interesting for me, but I have been really still digesting through this, what irritates me, what is the basis of, what I'm believing in about this social structure in general, and, so that was a part of, it's not the question, it's just my impression from this one.
Well, the face makeup was actually nothing to do with trying to look futuristic as such. It was more about trying to extend or expand the unification of the sense of unity amongst them as an ensemble, firstly. Secondly, it was about this idea of refraction of light. The nails and the silver makeup and the lighting was about extending the sense of reflection. There was nothing to do with reflecting out of a black, or not in terms of trying to pretend that black does it. It's a black space with these lights. Of course, the film, when it's graded, you get a much greater sense of the darkness, and you don't see the curtains. And, this is an ungraded version, actually. We didn't have the money to grade the split-screen version. In fact, the makeup idea came from thinking about how to disturb facial recognition patterns in internet surveillance of faces. So it was, initially we were trying all kinds of things out on their faces, like circles, and if you want to kind of defeat the internet facial recognition, the way the surveillance system works to watch your face, which is now in places like China just normal, and probably will be here soon. There are ways, we learned about this, and there was another artist working with this called Zach Blass, who we found very interesting because he teaches in Goldsmiths. And so we started to attempt to do all these black circles and do all these different things on their faces. It didn't really work. And then I thought, let's just take the light fitting itself and use that as a symbol on their faces. The light fitting being this object above them, which in some moments you see, which acts as a kind of almost device for refraction. So that was that part of it. I mean,
But I can speak to the other part. I mean, I haven't seen 50 Shades of Grey, nor have I read the book.
No, you don't need to.
But-
I was just
But you know, once we decided to work with this ensemble, you know, after spending several months trying to find this other ensemble of Afro-diasporic musicians, once we decided to work with these 4 brilliant musicians, then we realized that there would be this immediate high contrast between the black of the piano, the white of the 3 performers, the black of the keys, and the white of the keys. We realized this was there, and we decided to intensify it. So there is an aesthetic decision to exaggerate the contrasts of black and white to as great a degree as we can. So part of the irritation might be the insistence, the way the video insists on blackness and whiteness and continually aestheticizes it. So Paul Pfeiffer, the artist, talked about the finish fetish of the piano itself. He related the polish and the veneer and the lacquer of the piano to Eastman's kind of leather fetish, his kind of motorbike fetish, which is also a kind of queering of a policeman's black uniform. So he had a very elaborate notion of the kind of the exaggeration of a kind of digital blackness, which comes through even more in the installation. And then 3 of the pianists, we pushed the whites of the pianists. So they are white. They really are as white as we could make them. And so, the idea is that it's not especially natural. There's an element of exaggeration and denaturalization, which you could call a cliche, but I prefer to call an archetype, or I would actually much prefer to call it an avatar. I think they are avatars. I think the speakers are avatars, and I think the pianists are avatars. They are something like figures who incarnate intensities, and then we have to make the video itself participate in these forces. So the video is not a document of a performance. The video is, you know, the idea is that we're trying to make video music. You know, we're trying to make music with shots. We're trying to make music with montage. That means we're trying to make music with color. And so the kinds of irritation you feel are because of the insistent nature of this, that the video never really stops making its point over and over and over, just like the music itself doesn't. Part of the irritation is that part of the pleasure and irritation of Eastman's music, part of what I love about Eastman's music is the way in which it involuntarily plays you back. You know, so you will leave, you will be walking down the road, and parts of the music will return. Not because you've summoned them, but they've summoned you. Tomorrow, you will be somewhere doing something totally random, and large parts of the music will just start playing back. They will play you back. And in a way, when the music plays you back, you know, part of what you do is then you start humming it, you know, and then you pass it on. You find someone to pass it on to. So you become a vector for the music. This is what we plan. And in a way, what we want to do is in that vector of transmission when the music starts traveling, in a way we also want to fill that vector with many other things as well. Things which in a way are disturbing and should be disturbing. You know, the hyper naturalization, the hyper contrast, all of those things are part of the vector.
Sorry, but I just want to add, just to say one thing. I think, and this might seem very provocative, but I'll try to talk about it personally rather than fine boat in many ways, actually. The problem is with representation. I mean, would it actually make anyone feel, or what would it do if everybody was black in that film? Or, you know, what would it do? You know, the art world gets away with a lot through representation, right? I remember growing up in the UK and there being a whole kind of scene around Asian music, South Asians called the Asian Underground. It was awful, right? It was awful. And I knew that it would live and it would die, right? It's like Greg Tate says, when there's trouble on the street, the music theorist and critic and brilliant writer Greg Tate said to us when he met us in Philadelphia and we just made this, he said, when there's trouble on the streets, the white avant-garde come calling on our avant-garde, and meaning the black avant-garde. And it just makes you want to disturb that, you know. I am tired of the way that the art market uses blackness and the way the art market uses race. This at least allows us to talk about political blackness, right? Or Afro-pessimism, or, you know, the differences, say, socially in terms of race between Britain and the US, or the fact that we are all facing, you know, black people in the world, but not just black people, all of us who are on the left, let's say, and are determining and are maybe trying to rebuild what that means, are under threat, right? You know, for me, blackness is a space as an Indian growing up in Britain to disidentify, not with being Indian, but with whiteness. It was a way to understand the ergonomics of freedom. Black writing in Britain has been there for a long time, and black theorists and black thinkers, for me, were the most inspirational figures in my life. I didn't see a difference between them and me, you know. I saw that they were extending and thinking around pop culture. People like Stuart Hall, you know, I mean, he changed our lives, you know. He was on television at 2 in the morning deconstructing newspapers and, you know, according to kind of their racist headlines and whatever else, you know. When Stuart Hall says, people say, Stuart Hall said, when people ask me where I'm from, when I ask somebody where they're from, I expect to be told a very long story. Stuart Hall was from the Caribbean. You know, there was Indian, he had Indian blood, Portuguese blood, African blood. I mean, all kinds of things were circulating in him. So he really understood that sort of, the question of race. And so I think, you know, we have to be more clever when it comes to subverting what representation is now.
Yeah, I think it's, briefly, I'm going to say that I hop in, and for me it's important to remember that Eastman was in fact a weather queen. You know, he was into going to the bondage and S&M clubs, which is to say the relationships of power were always erotic. They were never naturalized, and he was really interested in getting productive pleasures out of all those layers of control and permission and denial. And that is utterly compatible with his work as a composer, where he's putting together these very complicated texts that demand lots of training and lots of rigor. And yet, because of all the, you know, because of the titles, because of who he is, because of the positioning, that each step is you know, eroticized or problematized or generates these discussions where we're talking about representation.
2 people, at least.
Yeah, I just had a kind of going back to what Jace mentioned about the kind of the resistance and kind of this notion of the positioning and use of terminology that kind of was an act of self-erasure, which maybe kind of, and as you said, was kind of deliberate. I'm actually curious about this notion of the recuperation of that act, and in fact, given the whole theoretical infrastructure that you guys talked about, this notion of critique of representation. So while actually I mean, not to, I know there seems to be like a competition of who discovers Eastman first. I'm definitely one of the most recent ones, and I saw your performance at Red Hat a few years ago. So That was really, and that kind of contrast, that's kind of like tension, is very productive, and it makes you confused and makes you want to know more. So I'm actually curious about this notion of visibility, and if that's something that actually Eastman would, how he, it's really hard to think through someone's psyche, but how he would think about that, this notion of representation, and kind of like this, especially in like art world, there's no historical determinacy, and it's like supposedly heterogeneous and everything goes, and there is actually no resistance. I mean, we can establish the fact that there is, but you know, I don't think there's a problem with this work in particular that's circulating in different moments right now, for instance. So I'm curious, is this notion of tension and this critique of visibility, and how you guys thought about it in the work?
I just want to say there's no competition, it's more like, yay, discovered in the It's not about competition, it's more enthusiasm.
Should we have the other point as well, and then we can work with both questions? Does somebody else had a point? Somebody else wanted to speak?
Yes.
Yeah. Here.
He's here, just right here.
I'm just really interested, like, with how we're positioning Eastman's work and your piece specifically within the context of Afro-pessimism, and particularly how the gay gorilla kind of survives that theoretical framework, a framework that specifically states that blackness is kind of, not really blackness, but black identity is devoid of meaning, and it's impossible to build a social movement outside of that. We talk about their major architects, so how does the gay gorilla actually survive that certain framework, especially with concerns to blackness and queerness? And we know that when blackness and queerness comes together, there's like an art to failure, so there's a generative work that is coming out of this supposed like nothingness that is not devoid of meaning, which I would say that Afro-pessimism would do it, but is actually the foundation, the ground, as Eastman says, for actually articulating what a great gorilla could be.
Okay, that's a lot of points. Thank you. I'm going to touch on a couple of things from both points. First, in relation to Sora, just 10 years before Eastman went to conservatory, the performer Eunice Waymans was refused entry into conservatories, and that's why she then became Nina Simone. So just 10 years later, Eastman entered into the conservatory and really travels through, a kind of a rarefied world, and was really at the heart of it, teaching in the music department at Buffalo, and he comes to New York, and he's really at the intersection of many scenes. But clearly at the same time, he has what Jace is describing, which I would describe as an esquisses, as a kind of capacity for esquisses, a capacity to work on the self, and to, so what people call self-destruction, I would call a work on the self, and so that he undoes all of his success and all of his fame, actually. At one point, he was a really famous performer, so I think it's not so much a question of visibility or non-visibility. It's a question of a continuous work on the self, which is running through all his music. I would say Eastman is a certain kind of spiritual ecstasy. You can see running through his work, there's references to Joan of Arc. At the end of his life, there's references to Buddha and to Hail Mary. There's references to Johann Sebastian Bach. I would say he was making a certain kind of spiritual music, a certain kind of, like an atheological spiritual music. That's the thread, more than the question of visibility or non-visibility. And then the question of AP, I mean, to me, one of the key things that Eastman is working before, the AIDS crisis. It's 1980. These compositions are written in 78, 79. So the relation to, kind of the global structure of anti-blackness is just differently situated. So we probably have to do some work to situate in a more precise way exactly how these figures, the figure of the gay gorilla, he writes an essay called The Composer as Weakling, the figure of the weakling. We probably have to do a bit more work. I mean, we're very influenced by, there's a great musicologist called Sumant Gopinath, who gave a great presentation in Berlin a few months ago, and he was talking about, the role of Eastman in relation to Genet. He was saying that the historical role of the queer black figure in the world of nationalism, so the way in which the queer black figure is a kind of rejected figure of animosity and antipathy in revolutionary nationalism, meant that Eastman effectively adopted a kind of the inverted spirituality of Genet, in which the criminal is the saint, and that Eastman transposed that notion, the inverted morality of the Genet-esque figure from the blacks and the balcony and the screen, the maids. He just transposed that into music, and then intensified it and proliferated it, and so I think that the question of AP and the question of a global structure of the slave who stands outside of the subaltern and who does not have access to labor, that these generalized points have to be brought into contact with the actual conjuncture that Eastman was in. And in a way, we're only just beginning to have a vocabulary, the vocabulary of AP, the vocabulary formulated by Franklin Wilson III and Jared Sexton, David Marriott, the vocabulary formulated by Fred Moten, Christina Sharp. These vocabularies, I think it's taken a long time for us to think through Eastman. Eastman, in a certain sense, was ahead of the discourse. He was ahead of theorization. He was ahead of the conceptual vocabulary. Even when you read musicology, it still hasn't really integrated these ideas of AP and of Fred Moten's notion of, what he used to call black optimism. It hasn't really integrated it, these notions of para ontology. None of them have really arrived in musicology. But part of the pleasure of Eastman is the way it's not possible not to think with these thoughts,
What do I have to add to that? I was entranced by there's so many things that make sense. Okay, it's like, so if Eastman is kind of centrifugal force, pulling me further afield, decentering me in ways, I'm just going to recommend you all to read Fran Ross's Oreo if you haven't yet. Amazing.
It's on my show.
It's such a, and I mentioned it now because it's another one of these figures. So New York, black, New York novel, 1984, hilarious, anti-essentialist, filled with games, and it's this point woman who failed to enter into the historical record. Came close. They published it in 84. It failed. No one paid attention to it. She went to write for Richard Pryor in LA. Amazing, for a TV serial, which never made it. It was reprinted in the 90s, and it was reprinted again by New Directions like 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm like, where's the auditorium of so many people talking about Fran Ross and what her book does to the American canon? So that's my Eastman-esque contribution to the end of this discussion.
And if you haven't heard Jace Clayton's brilliant work on Eastman, his interpretation, I really recommend you do it. It's absolutely.
So maybe that's a good point to close the evening. Okay, so I'd like to thank Sally, Roderick, and all the team at Eyebeam Assembly for inviting us out here to Bushwick to present our work.
And Beth.
Beth, of course, all the team, all the supporting staff, and most of all you for coming out to see Third Part of the Third Measure. Thank you very much and good night.